Good afternoon to you all, FIU and friends of FIU. Thank you for joining us this afternoon for what's expected to be a time of insightful exchange. My name is El Panye E.K. Hudson, and I'm privileged to serve FIU as Senior Vice President for Human Resources and the Vice Provost for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. Listen, we've convened this town hall today to discuss racism and First Amendment rights. And as a Black woman with lived experiences of racism and the privilege of First Amendment rights, I want you to know that I see you, I hear you, and I look forward to experiencing this exchange with you today, along with our esteemed moderator and illustrious panelists. Before we get started, I'd like to express sincere thanks and gratitude to my colleagues in external relations, student affairs, diversity, equity, and inclusion, the Office of Engagement, and our General Counsel's Office, all with whom we've worked collaboratively to bring today's event to you. There are also several members working behind the scenes today to answer questions and ensure that you have a great town hall experience. We want to acknowledge them as well. Today's discussion is top of mind for many universities across the nation. This town hall is being hosted with the objective of listening, educating, listening, informing of what public universities can do in ambiguous situations, listening, sharing some of what FIU is doing, and lastly, did I mention listening? That's very important. We're not deaf to nor immune from the racial tone and tenor we're experiencing now in our nation and in our respective communities. I'm very proud of our FIU for our willingness to have the uncomfortable conversations with the goal of enlightening, being enlightened, and amplifying the values that we espouse as we work daily toward inclusivity, respect, and value of each other's differences. As an institution of higher learning, we'll always draw on our opportunity to learn, always draw on the opportunity to grow and engage in meaningful conversations so we can be better and do better. Today's discussion is designed to do just that. So before we get started, I want to go over a few housekeeping rules. Today's discussion is being recorded and will be available later on news.fiu.edu and FIU's social channels. Should you have questions, please make sure that your questions are as succinct as possible to the topics being discussed. Please post them using the Q&A function. Our moderator will be asking the questions to the participants on your behalf. And there'll also be staff members responding directly in the Q&A box. At this time, I have the pleasure of introducing the fifth president of our FIU, Dr. Mark B. Rosenberg, to extend greetings to you.
Thank you, Madam Vice Provost. Good afternoon. Thank you all for being with us this afternoon. What a challenging couple of weeks we've had. What a really challenging year. And because FIU is not afraid of challenges, because we are a learning institution, because we're committed to being better to do better, we felt the sense of urgency to have this conversation and to try to understand each other's views and approaches even more. Do words matter? Can we hold people accountable for what they say? Are racist statements or words protected by the First Amendment? So many questions that are arising that I'd like for us to have a serious conversation about. So thank you very much. I'm looking forward to this discussion. Mute.
Thank you, President Rosenberg. It's now my distinct pleasure to introduce our moderator for the afternoon. Saif Ashuf serves as Vice President for Engagement at Florida International University and leads a dynamic team in the Office of Engagement. In addition to being a valued member of our executive leadership team, he's also a senior fellow in the Stephen J. Green School of International and Public Affairs, where he's accelerating a key group of priorities for Dean Stack. He's our weekly host of Cafecito Chat and is, in my eyes, a master moderator. I present to you all my colleague and friend, Saif.
Thank you so much, SVP Hudson. Good afternoon, Panther family. It's an absolute honor to be your moderator for today's important discussion on racism and the First Amendment. Now, I have to be honest, when SVP Hudson asked me to moderate today, truth be told, I'm usually the person sought out for pop culture references. That being said, I promise I won't be referencing Among Us today for anybody who's looking on. That being said, before I introduce our distinguished panel, I want to take a moment today to express gratitude to every single person that's in the Zoom room here. If you are here at this discussion, it is because you believe that we have a responsibility to make clear that racism and hate speech have no place at our FIU. If you are here at this discussion, you also believe in the important role that FIU as a state university has in protecting the free speech rights of every member of our university community. If you're here, you believe that our university, our FIU, must be a place where every single person has a sense of belonging. And if you are here, you take seriously, very seriously, our shared responsibility that we all have to nourish an environment of inclusion, understanding, growth, and debate. And so with that opening, I have the absolute honor of introducing our distinguished panel. Each one of these leaders is here today sharing their own insights as individuals, not as representatives of anyone or anything other than their good selves. So with that, please join me in welcoming our panel. I'm going to introduce them by name, and then after that, we're going to present an opportunity for every one of our panelists to share a brief presentation or a few words before we get into our Q&A. So with us joining today, we have Dr. Pelaez. Dr. Bronwyn Barres Pelaez serves as our Dean of Students at FIU. Welcome. We have Dr. Bowles. Emmanuel Bowles serves as our Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at FIU. Welcome, Dr. Bowles. We have Judge Marcia Cook, the Honorable Marcia G. Cook, U.S. District Court Judge for the Southern District of Florida. Welcome, Judge. We have Mr. Jefferson Noel. There's a problem in your title, Jefferson. It's actually Professor Jefferson Noel. He is an FIU alumnus and a professor at Florida Memorial University. And we have joining with us as well, Miss Annalise Stewart. Miss Annalise Stewart proudly serves as a Director of Marketing and Promotions at our FIU's Black Student Union. And finally, we have with us Professor Howard Wasserman. Professor Wasserman is an Associate Dean for Research and Faculty Development at FIU's. He's a professor of law at our FIU School of Law. Welcome, panelists. Let's go ahead and unmute all of our panelists right now. So this is a discussion, and as we're unmuting everyone, what we're going to do, we're going to start off asking Dr. Pelaez to share a couple of opening remarks from where she sits in this universe of our activity as we're discussing the First Amendment and race.
Thank you so much, Saif, and thank you to the other panelists, to EK and President Rosenberg, and I want to recognize and thank the hundreds of people that I see are tuned in to this critical conversation. I think one of my hopes for our conversation today is that we have a really robust conversation together and share this opportunity to listen, as EK mentioned, but also to learn and grow. I think, sometimes conversations like this lead to even more questions than have already been posed in the first few minutes. But I think that's ultimately how we all learn and grow. So just a quick little bit about me, Dr. Pelaez. I am the Dean of Students at FIU. What that means on the day-to-day is that I oversee a few different of the efforts at our university, such as our Panthers Care initiative. So working with students who may be experiencing some kind of distress or crisis. I also work with our behavioral intervention team, which is our threat assessment committee for the university. And I also supervise our student conduct and academic integrity department. So kind of a wide variety of student issues, behaviors, and concerns. So as you can imagine, the intersections of free speech and other types of bias or activities like that on campus are something that I work with fairly regularly. So I'm very grateful and honored to be part of this conversation. Thank you all for having me.
Thank you so much, Dr. Pelaez. And we're looking forward in the Q&A. Your insight as Dean of Students as FIU is critical in helping us navigate higher levels of understanding. And with that, next up, we have Dr. Bowles. Emmanuel Bowles serves as our Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. Dr. Bowles.
Thank you, VP Saif. Good afternoon. I'm excited to be part of this journey and be a part of this panel today. I would like to share with you what FIU will be doing moving forward. On that note, we would like to invite you all to join us on November 23rd for the official launch of our newly created Division of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, where we will be sharing more details about our initiatives. But for now, we want to make you aware of our top 4 priorities of the many things that we will be doing as a university. The first one being that we will be incorporating diversity, equity, and inclusion goals and performance measures for the university and university leaders in our strategic plan. The second one is to increase diversity in Black faculty, administrators, graduates, and undergraduate students, as well as in our board presence. The third one being that we would like to enhance our African and African diaspora study programs. And the fourth one being incorporating university-wide inclusive excellence training. So these 4 top priorities will allow us to gain short and long-term wins that will result in sustainable transformation to help move us to leveling our field of access and inclusion at the university. It will take a collective effort as a university to make these change. We know that our Panthers throughout our community are eager to listen, learn and grow, and we look forward to working with everyone on this journey.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bowles, for sharing about that upcoming launch event for the DEI initiative. And I know one of the things that we've heard is making sure that we get the good word out and about all of those activities that are happening. Of course, the leadership of our everyone at our FIU around that matters so very much. Next up, we have our very own, the Honorable Marcia Cook, U.S. District Court Judge. Judge Cook, I believe you might actually have a little bit of a presentation or a slide to get us thinking about this important topic. Judge Cook? We need you to unmute, Judge.
That's going to be the word of 2020. You're still on mute. Thanks for the reminder. Very often, Saif, we all start saying something like, my First Amendment rights have been violated. But how often do we actually even look at what the First Amendment says and how it offers us guidance for discussion? And I thought that the first order of business today might be an opportunity just to read, what does the First Amendment say? Now remember, today as I speak, I'm just trying to offer all of us tools for analyzing a situation. And I'm not speaking about any particular case or facts specifically, but I thought you should see, first of all, First Amendment says Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof or abridging speech. So what our founders wanted to make sure was our government wasn't prohibiting us from speaking. So we should always look at who or what do we think is prohibiting us from talking. And then secondly, I thought I'd talk about the university. What is a university's role in regards to speech? And what have the courts set as a standard? It's a pretty high bar. When you look at what the courts have said about when and how a university can restrict campus speech, it has to materially and substantially interfere with the operation of the school. So as we offer and go forward this afternoon and think about speech on campus, I think we should keep in mind, one, what does the First Amendment say? And is the speech that we're referring to falling in that category that it would materially or substantially interfere with the operation of the university and its functions? Of course, there are nuances, and I'm certain as we go forward on the panel today, we'll talk about those nuances, including some specifics that are required by our Florida legislature in terms of university speech.
Thank you so much for that important grounding, Judge Cook. I feel like I'm in a, you took us, some of us right back to a con law class just now. And I know that we're going to be hearing from Professor Wasserman in just a bit, but we appreciate you giving that opening framing and bringing it right back to the letter of the First Amendment. I also want to encourage everyone who's looking on at home. This is an interactive conversation. If you have a question or comment, please use the Q&A feature. We have folks from throughout our FIU who are helping to answer those questions. And also, if you send those Q&A questions, I can ask those questions our panelists. So I want to encourage everyone, use the Q&A feature. We're going to be moving to Q&A in just a little bit. Next up, we have Professor Jefferson Noel. Professor.
Thank you, Saif. I appreciate this opportunity. Thank you to the university. Thank you, President Rosenberg. Thank you, SVP Hudson. I appreciate the time. As we're having this conversation, I must tell you that I am extremely nervous. And I'm nervous because the behavior that led us to have this conversation in the first place is sickening. It is very sickening, and I don't think I speak for myself when I say that. And I know that as a Black person living in America, we love this country. I love this country. I love the United States, but sometimes we just don't feel welcomed. We don't feel welcomed. We don't feel appreciated. And when I think of the racial slurs that's levied against us, it sort of feels like it strips away at our dignity as a people. At the same time, when I think about how to cope in this society, when there are certain people who are against us, I'm aware that there's more people that are for us. There are more people that love us. There are more people that care about us than there are that's against us. And so, so when I see these things, I cope through celebrating Black excellence and supporting Black excellence, and ignoring or not focusing on the people who are dividing us, and fix my attention on those who wants us to be stronger. And I appreciate the community that I have here, my FIU, and obviously the community I have at FMU as well, to help us to focus and live with dignity.
I really appreciate your comments, Professor, and the operative word around there being dignity. I think that there's so much more to that, and also appreciate your vulnerability in talking about just it's important that we recognize that as we're holding a space here, that we know that we have a responsibility as humans to affirm each other. And I want to thank you for mentioning this, the deep wound of the attempt of stripping away dignity. Thank you for that. And I think that's a perfect segue into Miss Annalise Stewart. Miss Stewart serves as a leader at our BSU at FIU. Annalise?
Hello, everyone. I'm super excited to be here, and thank you, Saif. Thank you, Jefferson, for those words, because I really think you hit home with those. I do want to point out that Jefferson and Saif, you both touched on super important words, and they're both values of our university. And so I did want to remind everyone who's watching, remind everyone who's here about our university values. And those are truth, freedom, respect, responsibility, excellence. And so Jefferson, you did mention our Black excellence. That's what we know that we have to excel in this space, in this world. And so I think right now, the value that everyone is trying to realign FIU with I know myself as a student, myself as a Black woman, a Panther here at FIU, what we're trying to realign with is the respect. We're trying to find our space in that, underneath that value that is respect here at FIU, because I do think that, like Jefferson said, the event that brought us here to this town hall, the events that have brought us here to this town hall is a breach of respect. And so I think everyone tuning in right now, we're trying to realign ourselves with these values and make sure that what's happening here, that as we're serving FIU, FIU is serving us back. And so we're just looking for that mutualism. So I'm super excited to have this very genuine, authentic, and raw conversation with everyone here.
Thank you so much for that, Annalise. I think you circling around the word values is so important. And I think it's also important for us to recognize that, and this is for everyone who's looking on, we're holding this discussion today, but I know that SVP Hudson and the entire leadership at our university are committed to making sure that these dialogues are ongoing. You can't just get in a Zoom room for 90 minutes and in one setting and think that you get to a place of building the beloved community. It's going to take so much more than that. And that's something that requires all of us putting our shoulder to the wheel together. And I think the spirit of what you said, Annalise, really captures that. Next up, we've got Professor Howard Wasserman. Professor?
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming to this very important conversation. Thank you to Dr. Hudson for including me. I want to try to lay out 4 principles that I think provide a little bit of the nuance that Judge Cook mentioned about what the First Amendment means and how it applies. And hopefully these can provide a little bit of a framework, a little bit of context for the conversation that's going to follow. So first, and these are First Amendment principles, and this is sort of the description of prevailing US free speech law. So first, there is no hate speech exception to the First Amendment. Hate speech, racist speech, racial epithets are all fully constitutionally protected. So the meme that you see on Twitter, oh, that's hate speech, it's not free speech, it's not an accurate depiction of or description of the state of the law. Second, there are some types of speech or some categories of speech that are excluded from the First Amendment. And for our purposes, there's 4 that are worth mentioning. Incitement of unlawful activity, threats, harassment, and what are called fighting words. And a lot of time there's overlap between those 4 categories and racist speech and hate speech. But those categories are very narrowly defined and quite intentionally so. The 4th principle comes from Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes, who said that we revere the principle of free thought, not for those who agree with us, but rather freedom for the thought we hate. The First Amendment exists to protect distasteful, objectionable, and even offensive expression. And otherwise, there wouldn't be, if we only protected the speech we all like, there wouldn't really be a need to protect speech at all. And then the 5th principle is that the solution that the First Amendment guarantees is not to either stop or sanction objectionable speech, but rather to call for people to engage in counter speech. As Justice Louis Brandeis said, the remedy to be applied is more speech, not enforced silence. To respond, to counter, to criticize, to condemn, to denounce objectionable and offensive speech and speakers. And on that, I want to commend the statement that President Rosenberg issued a week ago, because that was exactly what the First Amendment expects and anticipates. It was clear, it was unequivocal opposition and criticism of an objectionable speech and objectionable speaker. And what we are doing here reflects that same idea, coming out to express, as Professor Noel said, our values in the face of a contrary expression. So with that in mind, hopefully that will provide a little bit of a framework for what follows.
Thank you for that, and thank you for also providing us that framework, Professor. I think that it's very helpful for everyone that's here. I'm going to go ahead and just start with a quick comment before we start to jump into our Q&A, and I think that this is important. We know that several of the questions in the Q&A refer to a specific incident. And as a university, we can't actually answer directly any questions related to a specific student right now due to federal, state, and privacy laws in commenting on any specific student matter. So I want to go ahead and put that out there. There's a space in place for discussion and dialogue, but we also need to be mindful of federal and state laws regarding privacy. With that being said, I'm going to go ahead and jump into some of the questions that we are starting to get. I think that first one is really a little bit of momentum off of what Professor Wasserman just shared, which is this idea of the role that the First Amendment plays with respect to protecting hate speech. So Judge Cook, I want to start with you. You gave us a primer. You reminded us again of the language of that's written in the First Amendment. And I guess the opener is around, does the First Amendment protect hate speech? And what does that actually mean? And this is not with respect to any matters which might appear in front of you right now as a sitting federal judge, but a more open-ended philosophical question about, does the First Amendment protect hate speech?
I think Professor Wasserman hit the nail on the head when he went through the factors. I mean, despite what we think social media tells us, we know that all speech, absent those limited categories, is protected. We wouldn't have a First Amendment unless we were willing and able to protect speech that offends us. Now, what the Constitution does is it does draw a line between speech that we might disagree with, that we might find as hateful, and speech that is violent or would incite violence or interferes with an operation of the university in its full form. So that is what I think that when we look at whatever situation we're analyzing, we ought to remember, you know what is the best remedy, as was said in the cases, is the best remedy for so-called negative speech is more speech. When you talk about it, when you tell people that things are objectionable, that's constitutionally permissible as well. And I also think the university has to, in its own way, understand that and explain that to all of us who participate in educational activities, that we are sometimes going to hear things that we don't like, but that doesn't make it unconstitutional speech.
Thank you for sharing that, Judge Cook. I also appreciated you mentioning this notion of the role that institutions have to play in educating and informing everyone about the responsibilities we have in generating our own forms of speech, our own forms of discourse and debate. Annalise, I want to jump over to you right now to kind of ricochet, if you will, off of Professor Wasserman and Judge Cook's remarks around this sense of the best cure, if you will, for hurtful, painful, distasteful speech is a platform to be able to counter that with excellence, and also eroding at hateful discourse. Do you have some thoughts on that, Annalise? And what does that look like for our FIU? I want this to be a real conversation, not a overly robotic one. What are your thoughts on that, my friend?
Well, thank you, Sai, for having me answer this question. I agree. I'm the first one to say all the time that conversations change the world, right? Communication is powerful. And that's exciting. That's exciting to know and it's exciting to hear. I think as a student here at FIU, I'm driven by the conversations, right? I'm excited to sit in on all of them. I told you, Saif, that I've seen you moderate all the time because I'm the first to log on. I'm the first to send these links around for these town halls and things like that. I'm a part of BSU. We do our people's platforms. These conversations are energizing. I think where we get lost in this and the waters get muddy is when we have these out loud conversations and then changes begin to happen behind the scenes. And so for the student body, we've sat here, we've listened, and to everyone walking around the MMC campus, to everyone walking around BBC, DC, wherever at FIU we're walking around, we're not actually seeing the change, even though it's happening. And so I think the disconnect is in the level of transparency that's happening between the student body and administration. And so while I do agree the best remedy for hate speech is more speech, I think right now everyone's looking for very actionable items, very explicitly seen. And so I think that's where we're going to get the most positive feedback from the student body.
I really appreciate what you just said, Annalise, this idea of how to, and President Rosenberg often talks about this notion of deeds must match words. And I think part of the journey that we're on and that we've already been under, and I want to appreciate SVP Hudson, and it's not just about EK, it's about an entire institution committing itself to doing better at a structural level on a number of different fronts. And I think part of it is a translational piece. How do we get the word out? How do we make sure that the things that are happening are better known specifically by our students? And so with that, I want to pivot over to Dr. Bowles to share some insight on what does the forward momentum look like around action embedding as a practice, both strategically and also culturally, the changes that are needed that I believe Annalise is referencing. Dr. Bowles?
I'm so excited to hear that Annalise, as a student, wants to hear what we're doing. We have so much that we can do. I applaud the university and President Rosenberg for calling for the Equity Action Initiative after the George Floyd murder, and that I was a part of as an assistant director, and allowing multiple constituents from FIU, from students to faculty to alumni to staff, to have a part of looking inward, looking at what we can do as an institution to really level the playing field and be a more inclusive campus for everyone, and to let everyone know that they belong. So hence, we're here. We have a division that's going to be intentional. Our diversity, equity, and inclusion division that's going to be very intentional in terms of what we do, from embedding goals within our strategic plan, right? So if we embed those goals in our strategic plans, we can hold our leaders accountable. And that sets the direction of the university to having more of these intergroup, intercultural dialogues, right? Amongst students, faculty, staff. We're an educational institution. We sell education. We teach learning, right? We have the opportunity to learn ourselves, to listen from our students, our faculty, our staff, our alumni, our suppliers. So I'm so excited. I'm super excited that, of all the great things that we're doing and will be speaking more about at our launch, and it will be communicated on all levels. We have a diversity council that has been seated, right? I think that's the right terminology. And there's students on there, there's faculty, there's staff. And so that transparency and communication will be more intentional, and the word will be out of the changes, and hopefully within the next year, we'll be able to track our progress from what was recommended in the EAI and things that we've now embedded into our strategic plan, and many other great things that we have planned around diversity, equity, and inclusion at the university. I hope that answered the question, Saeed.
I think it did, Dr. Bowles, and I think that, and I want to put this idea out there for discussion, which is that when I started at FIU, someone asked me, about, if I work at FIU, and an older colleague told me, he said, you don't work at FIU, you work on FIU. The idea that all of us have a responsibility to work on improvement, that when you're a part of university life, you are working towards the betterment, the best version of what an institution can be. But I think it is important, to Annalise's point, how do we ensure that that flow of information is happening? Most especially, important structural changes are landing in messages and in a way that students can understand and that students are actually able to access. I want to go ahead and pivot over to Dr. Pelaez, because I think it's important. We know that there's we want to get a question that came in. I'm going to read it. I'm not going to extemp it, so I'm going to read it here. Can you explain how the student code of conduct process works generally regarding hate speech and incidents where students use language that may be considered hate speech? So could you walk us through that process, Dr. Pelaez?
Yes, definitely. Thank you so much for that question, because I think that sometimes when we don't know how things work, that's where we end up, in a way, speaking different languages, right? That we're asking different questions of each other or different information. So I'll share some of the generalities, right, without any specific examples in mind. So a report is received. Let's start there. And typically for us, the reports that we receive that we are able to take action on have a series of information in them that allows us to take action on them. So for example, the person that their behavior is being reported is identifiable, right? If we know who it is, then we are much more likely to be able to take some kind of action, whether it's through student conduct, through the Dean of Students office, or otherwise. So typically, the more information that we have, is usually easier for us to understand what action we can take. So for that reason, we often ask people to have as much information available. If they have any evidence, that they're turning that in with their reports to us, so that we can best understand the circumstances of the situation. So those pieces are really important. That being said, anyone can report student behavior to us. Our system is not authenticated, meaning you don't have to log in or identify yourself in order to report student behavior to the university. And I think that's really important, because there's some layers there that I like to always point out, meaning we will accept a report from anyone. And I have received reports from people unaffiliated with the university at all, people out in the community or otherwise. I've received anonymous reports because of this factor, which is really important, right? We want people who may have any kind of concern about retaliation or any other reason why they might be concerned about reporting something to somebody or something to us, that they can report that anonymously. Now, that's something that has sort of two sides of that coin, because if a report is anonymous and we have follow-up questions, or we need to better understand parts of the situation, we may not always be able to follow up with the reporter. But still, we really want to value that idea of reporting anonymously above our ability to always be able to follow up. So there's sort of an important factor there, and anyone can report behavior through our student conduct. It's conduct.fiu.edu. Also on through the Dean of Students office, through our Panthers Care. I mentioned that already, Panthers Care initiative. Students, anyone can refer anyone who might be, not just their behavior is concerning, but they might need help, right? So there's, like I mentioned earlier, a really wide variety of things that might be reported to us. So with that being said, the report is received, the information is analyzed, and to understand whether a violation of our code of conduct has occurred. So I like to think of our code of conduct is our set of expectations, our policies, our regulations, and rights for our students. That's a critical aspect of our code of conduct that we have that is I think it's expectations above and beyond the law, and yet our code of conduct can never contradict the law. So that's, I think, an important nuance for folks to understand. What are we understanding, or what are we analyzing? When I say we're analyzing the reports, what are we analyzing? We're looking for whether we have that evidence, that information to show the violation of the code of conduct. Once that is decided, then the typical report kind of goes two different directions from there. If it is a code violation, then we follow the code from there, and it's all laid out in our code of conduct exactly what the steps will be once a violation of the code has been determined. So that may include that information has to be shared with the student with a certain amount of time for them to review it, to understand it, to respond to us, and then to go through the process. And the process could include lots of different steps from there that really depend on the details. But all of those steps are laid out in the code. It's not, there's nobody sitting there deciding, I think today we will have a hearing for this, or not. Quite the contrary. It's laid out in the code of conduct. Now, so I mentioned two roads. So I'm going to backtrack to where they diverge and go back to when we have a case where a code violation has not been deemed for whatever reason. Maybe there's not enough evidence, or maybe it's not a violation because it's protected by a law or by some other policy that we have. So from there, those cases typically get referred to my office in the Dean of Students office for us to further analyze and understand what are the steps that need to be taken. So, examples might include, or things that I'm really very interested in often are, what is the behavior? Is this an educational opportunity for us? Is there an opportunity for us to, help our community or people, an individual person, whatever the case may be, to understand our policies and expectations, our values in new or different ways? Or do they need to understand the impact of their behavior in new and different ways? And the other thing that I'm always looking for is that impact piece. And what can we as a university do to I think, address that impact for anyone in our community. And that can include, that's typically very specific to the situation, but that can include offering folks opportunities to come together, talk. Sometimes that's offering students information about how to peaceably assemble on campus or otherwise engage in more speech, as we're talking about here. Sometimes it's offering, resources at the university, right? Things like our counseling center and other support resources that may be impactful for an individual or a group to benefit from, having an opportunity to come together and process information and things like that. Just a few examples of ways that we really take into account the importance of the impact and try to design a response or support process based on the impact, based on the facts of, whatever the situation might call for. So it's a lot of working together. It's a lot of, to Annalise's point earlier, of, I think, it isn't necessarily always going to be something that you see immediately. That change that she talked about, that can take time, but that is so critical for us to engage in as part of the impact. And the last thing I'll share that I think is a helpful resource that, I hear Annalise's comment, and even in this question calls for, action and things like that, just to give you a sense that Dr. Bowles and I already met. Was that this week? This week has felt quite long. Yes, we met earlier just this week to look at our bias reporting and response activities at the university, because we do, if you go to stopbias.fiu.edu, you can see some infrastructure of what already exists, but that we recognize that with Dr. Bowles' new position, with Vice Provost Hudson's new position, there's a lot of opportunity for us to re-examine the efforts that are already underway and have some of these, conversations that perhaps we've already had, but it's a great time for us. Great isn't a good word. It's an important time for us. It's critical for us to take this opportunity that we have right now to look at what we already have and how do we enhance it? How do we work with and for our students to enhance what we're already offering? So it's a topic I'm really passionate about. I could talk about
Definitely.
This because the process is so important for us to follow, and yet within that, we do have to work together to understand the processes and understand what is going on and understand the options that we have as university. So I'll leave it at that for now.
Dr. Plies, thank you for that. And I want to underscore coming out of your remarks that the idea that there's an important balance between process, impact, and human sentiment. And I've gotten to know a lot of the folks that work with you and on your team, and all under the umbrella of Dr. Behar. And for all of our students that are listening in, there are very, very thoughtful folks that are here, including Dean Pelaez and others. That healing part is definitely embedded. It's not merely about mechanical processes. Process matters because process is a form of accountability, but connected to that is also the human element. And I want to appreciate Dr. Plies that is, I'm translating what you said. You gave a much longer word, but on one end there's process, but on the other end, we will not forget the importance of the human element and the professionals that work on your team and as part of our university. If you're a student that's out there, please know that there are resource people like Dean Plies and like Dr. Bowles that are there. Okay, we're going back into con law now for a second. We're going a little bit heavier. So this is, I said that, and Professor Wasserman and Judge Cook just leaned forward. Hey friends, it isn't that often in life that you get to flip it around and ask questions to a judge. So I'm taking advantage of that, or a law professor. So I've got a little bit of a law school PTSD in me. So I'm going for some of the heavier duty con law type questions here. So here it is. First one up is and really around speech and hate speech. And I'll land it with Professor Wasserman. Can you address why it is some students at other higher ed institutions can be expelled?
Because private university, and this goes back to the first point that Judge Cook raised, private universities aren't subject to the First Amendment the way public universities such as FIU is. And so a private university basically has no First Amendment limits on it, so it can choose to punish students however it wishes to. Now, that said, most private universities take the position, sort of voluntarily take the position that a university is a unique institution, and so they comport themselves as if they are bound by the First Amendment. So in deciding whether to sanction a student over some speech, they will act as if the First Amendment doesn't apply to them. But they don't have, that's a choice that they make as a policy matter. They don't have to make that. That option's not available to a public university.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Professor Wasserman. Judge Cook, anything you wanted to add on that one, or do I come to you for another hard, complicated question?
No, but I would also add into that, and I think Professor Wasserman would agree, and that is the Florida Campus Free Expression Act that places additional limitations on what public universities can and cannot do in the state of Florida concerning student expression. And as I listened to Professor Wasserman and I read the FIU student handbook, the type of behavior, I don't want to use the word speech, the type of behavior that the student handbook says is impermissible on campus lines up pretty well with the type of behavior that Professor Wasserman says is sort of accepted when we have the sort of free speech analysis involving the campus context. And it talks about speech that is abusive, threatening, intimidating, or coercive. And it uses those types of language or would incite fear, distress, injury. So those are the types of speech that your university, probably consulting with wise counsel, decided to have addressed in the university handbook because it sort of lines up with those constitutional strictures.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Judge Cook. I'm going to loop back to Annalise, who had we want to make sure that this is not just a discussion, but we're actually having some dialogue because we've got awesome panelists. So Annalise, I believe you had a follow-up question for Dr. Pelaez.
Thank you, Faith. Yes, Dr. Pelaez. I heard everything that you said about what it is that you do in your capacities, in your positions. And that was very insightful to hear about how our Sky office actually, or department actually operates. But I just wanted to loop back to what the perspective of the student, right? In this conversation, we've had a lot of very by the book, like here's how things operate, you know? But to a student, here's what I feel like our student body is missing. The part that I feel like we're missing is that, so to make it very simply put, just because I can't find any other more eloquent ways to put it, when you in the world like commit a crime, right? You're put in the news, this person, I won't ever do it. Anna Stewart robbed a bank. Everyone's like, wow, Anna Stewart did that. A couple weeks later, you see Anna Stewart sentenced to 2 years in jail, 3 years in jail, whatever, because she robbed a bank, right? If for no other reason, there are some people who are motivated by just the fact that I don't want to go to jail for 2 years, so I will not rob a bank, right? What our student body, I think the piece that we're missing is that these things are happening, right? And yes, your offices are going through the motions, right? And making sure that everything is going off, you know, by procedure. I think that everyone is missing the part where something happens, or at least something is said to be happening. What we're hearing is a lot of these things are protected. What you want to happen. Obviously, everyone is screaming, you know, like the most extreme thing, but we obviously cannot do that. What we do want to hear is that something is being done, you know, and appealing to the more emotionally intelligent side of things, you know. So one, that there's action being taken, obviously not an article about what's happening, but something is happening, right? And then two, more of appealing to the emotional intelligence of the students and utilizing our own as a university administration. So, you know, I just feel like there's a bit of like objectivity happening here, and it's just staying really objective. Whereas students are, to simply put it, students are hurt by this. Students are hurt by things like this that happen in the world, at our university, in our communities. Students are simply put very hurt. And so I think appealing to that and helping our student body heal is a very important piece that I think is missing, or it's just tucked away in the background. And two, putting it out there that something is happening to be proactive in preventing the next instance like this. So I think, how do we navigate that, Dr. Flip?
Thank you for those questions and for your feedback. So I'll start with the second question first, actually, because I think there is quite a difference between being proactive around these issues and being reactive. And to a certain extent, there may always be things to react to. So right, we have to, at a certain point, I think, parse through a little bit of what are we being proactive about, what can we be proactive about, and then what are we being reactive to that we could be more proactive about, and then what are the things that perhaps, because life can be unpredictable at times, and there may always be a certain amount of reaction that you're right, we do need to strike a balance, I think, between speaking from our hearts while still upholding people's rights and the laws and things like that, and striking a balance between transparency and privacy, right? Because we've already kind of gotten to a little bit of the technical aspects of what you're talking about, and you're right, that is your observation, I think, about how challenging that balance can be at times is very valid. So I thank you for sharing that. I think that to your earlier point about some of the impressions, right, about when and how we can say what's happening versus something is happening. I hear you loud and clear that those are two different things and really can leave quite a different impression on, let's say if you were to report something to me and I respond saying, I can't tell you anything, versus I respond, I'm working on it, because both of those things may be true, right? But that the messaging, I'm just using that you as an example, right? That the messaging of how I respond to you is something for us to think about. I hear you, and I guess I thank you for that feedback, because I think the more we know about how to work with you all and utilize your voices and incorporate your voices, that's something very meaningful to us and really important to me. I'll speak for myself, that's really important to me.
Thank you, and I appreciate your transparency in that.
Can I chime in there as well?
Sure,
and I
Emmanuel.
might be getting in
Dr.
front of,
Bolt, jump right in.
yes, I might be getting in front of what EK may want me to share, but I'm going to share it because it's very important in this piece. As part of our work, and we've looked at our policies and procedures, and we want to add new things, such as an anti-racist statement that is for the university, and that we communicate that to all of our students, our faculty, and staff, and that's a statement, anti-harassment statement, anti-discrimination statement that we have as a university, and that all of our students coming in the door and current students know of that. And so how do we communicate that to the students? Well, training, making you all go through additional required training to ensure that you know what our values are as a university, what we pride ourselves in, what we stand for, right? So if you're coming in the door and you're hearing we have an anti-racist statement in the university and you're a racist, you can opt out, right? So there's things like that we will be doing. We're in the process and having conversations where we need to have the conversations during our launch, and then actualizing and operationalizing what we want to do in terms of the communication to everyone, so they know what FIU stands and does not stand for. On top of that, we're looking at different things that we can update, right? Maybe it's time to update different sections of our code, or different ways that we can improve through ethics guideline for the entire university. So, and at least, BSU has a seat on our diversity council, but we want to hear this. We want to have more conversations. We want to have more spaces where our students and our faculty and staff can come and heal from things like this, right? So that we have more programming around that, and we want to hear the feedback. Email me, rchange@fiu.edu, and attend our launch, which will launch our website where anybody can provide more feedback. We welcome that, and thank you for your honesty and transparency.
Thank you, Dr. Bowles.
Thank you. And to everyone that's looking on, and I think Annalise, you said it best, and I think Dr. Pelaez gave us some good context. The reality is that we recognize that students are hurt, and that there's hurting that's out there, and on the other side of that hurting are the processes and steps that we can take around healing, and whether it's a town hall or the openness that we have to feedback, this is a community journey. And the words of Annalise really ring true. We are all hurting. One part of our FIU community that feels diminished is every single part of our FIU community that feels diminished. And so I want to say that's SIFE talking. That's SIFE talk. So, but I want to go ahead and go over to Professor Noel. Because you are somebody that is a leader, you are a student leader at our FIU, you're a leader in our community, and someone that all of us look to for your wisdom. You've got wisdom well beyond your years. You should have a white beard, but you don't. But that being said, Professor, can you share with us what are steps for leaders right now, student leaders that are at our FIU? What can they do to be helpful and effective allies for our friends and classmates in response to the presentation of racism in our community? What can they do? What can student leaders do? And even students that they want to be allies, guide us, lead us, give folks some guidance on that, Professor.
Thank you, Saif. And as I answer your question, I want to underline what Annalise said. I think it's very important because when we think about the First Amendment, we understand that the First Amendment was a vehicle that Black people used in order to be free in this country. The First Amendment is the vehicle that we use in order to be where we are today as a community. And so, and I agree with what she said about, speaking to our emotional needs, but also figuring out how to take action. And so to answer your question, it's figuring out how student leaders, they have to, partner with people like SVP Hudson. I was reading the Equity Action Initiative, and I thought it was amazing. The charge that was in it, in part was no death by committee, work must be action-oriented, no sacred cows, everything would be on the table, et cetera. Think big for quick victories as well as long-term sustainability. I think all of those things are what students need and want. And we have to be able to work hand in hand with administration to achieve those goals. So I think student leaders, there has to be an open line of communication between the university administration and the administration. And then also there has to be a way to communicate that with the broader group. So one is definitely continue having the conversations. Continue having the conversations of your hurt, continue to have the conversations of the pain whenever you hear someone use a racial slur. I believe that those conversations that you have amongst yourselves is a form of healing. The second step is to not to keep those conversations in a silo, but to have direct conversations with the people who are working to solve it. Because as far as I see with the Equity Action Initiative, and the work that they did after George Floyd, I see that FIU has a commitment. FIU has a commitment to make sure that people feel more included, to make sure to make people know that diversity is a staple at FIU. And once those conversations happen, is for the conversation to continue between student leaders with the administration, and then with students in general. Because I think what student leaders they feel is these are one-off conversations. They're just having this panel to sweep it under the rug, and then 2 months later it's back to business as usual. I don't think that's the case with FIU, but students may perceive it as that. So the line of communication has to constantly be open, in order for students to have that confidence. And so I applaud Annalise, one, for being on this panel, for speaking truth. And the conversations with the student leaders must continue even before there's an incident. I know what's happening. I know it's been happening. The conversations with CAPS, I forgot the name, but they're having, they've been having conversations every so often. So that has to happen. It has to be promoted as much as a football game. The conversations around racial justice has to be promoted as much as sports, as much as everything the university values. It has to be on that equal level. And it's the students' responsibility to continue to be a part of those conversations. And then to share the conversations that's happening with the upper level, to share it with their friends and classmates as well.
Professor, there's so many gems of wisdom in what you just said, but I think one of the pieces that everyone can take away is the idea that this is about every single person at FIU taking responsibility for owning the type of culture that we deserve, that affirms the dignity of every single person at FIU. This is not just for some, and I'll just, a little real talk. This is not for folks like myself and SVP Hudson because we're leaders of color. This is something that the changing of our culture is something that belongs to all of us. And what I love about what you channeled there is you challenged all of us to our better angels, that we all have a responsibility around this. And it's not just about the theater of action, it's about meaningful change. And so with that, I'm going to go ahead and come right back to for Dr. Pelaez and Dr. Bowles. And this is a very specific question that we received, and it is, what will FIU do to make sure that its student body does not feel unheard? What are the specific steps?
Dr. Pelaez, you want to go first? I could go first.
I actually think it would be perfect if you go first, because I know you have big plans for this.
Yeah. So there's a number of things that we're doing. One, with the launch, we will be including a belonging survey that will go out to all of our students, faculty, staff. So when you see it, take it. That's your opportunity to let us know, like, how you're feeling, what's been going on, right? That's one way. We will be hosting different focus groups around different topics, right? So about DEI and how do you feel about diversity, equity, and inclusion in your classroom content, or within your departments, or within your units. So we're going to be having specific focus groups where we're soliciting that feedback, right? We will also be every unit, every school, college, every business unit, department we'll have what we call the diversity, equity, and inclusion DEI advocate, where they're in the unit. So what's coming from us as a division, and where we're holding every dean and every VP accountable, because as VP Saif said, this is a collective effort, right? DEI is not here to be the unit that's solving what we can do better at the university. It's to help us be more intentional and put the onus and the responsibility and accountability on those who will help us to level the playing field for inclusion and equity at the university. So every unit will have a DEI advocate who will report directly to the dean or the business unit, and they will be ensuring that any performance measures or goals surrounding DEI is being accounted for and being reported back to SVP Hudson in her vice provost role for DEI. We will also be incorporating into our SLS courses a DEI module class, into our global learning classes, a module surrounding DEI. In every faculty and staff orientation, we will be infusing that. And I venture to even say at the university, we have future focused literacies, and we will be creating one surrounding diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so just as much as we're putting importance on ensuring that we're staying up to date with technology, that everyone is staying up to date with diversity, equity, and inclusion. We all have room to learn and to grow. And that's what we're going to be ensuring that we're doing at the university and making improvements. We're going to be tracking it. Professor Noel talked about the EAI. On our website, we're going to be tracking what we have done or completed or in progress or planned from those initiatives proposed in the Equity Action Initiative. It's a 206-page document. We had some great stuff. And we're going to be tracking that we're making progress to that so everybody can see it. So that transparency is there, that the tracking of the growth is there. I talked a lot, so I'll lobby it to you.
Dr. Bowles, what I want to translate in what you're saying is that this momentum, this action, it's not about PowerPoints. This is about creating points of power. And I think that I got some snaps from Jefferson for that. You like that? Can we get a laugh for that one? You know, is that, but
hashtag it, your hashtag.
You got a hashtag? Oh man, I'm not trying, we are creating spaces in which there are points of power that are being distributed, not documents and glossies that are merely on walls. And from our president, and everyone that's part of driving forward action, it's about how are we creating dispersive points of power, and also ensuring that sense of agency, which I know it's something that Annalise talked about. Like ultimately, we have to ensure that our students are conferred and empowered with that sense of agency. So, Dr. Playas, and then we're gonna come back to Judge Cook and Professor Wasserman. We're going to the con law squad in a little bit. So we're gonna go to Dr. Playas on action for our students. What does that look like?
Yeah, so thank you, Dr. Bowles, for sharing the vision that's been developed over the last, I guess, really 6 months or so. We're getting on 6 months, which I think is so inspiring because these enhancements, I'll use the word enhancements because I do want to acknowledge that a lot of this work has already been happening at FIU for a long time, and that these enhancements, this big vision, is an amazing new commitment that Dr. Bowles and Vice Provost Hudson and the president and others are making this commitment to really enhance things, and I'm looking forward to seeing it, to being part of it, and most importantly, to your question, for students to be part of that, because ultimately we are all here for our students, right? And with our students, our university exists because of our students, and it's important for us to always keep that in focus and in mind, and acknowledge, to your point, Saif, the power dynamic at play here, right? That it's important for us to acknowledge that and understand that in order for us to build or rebuild or enhance or adjust sustainable change in our systems, we have to our voices need to be heard, and we need to make space for that. So I'm really excited that that's happening. I think other things, just to put it out there, I mean, I meet with students and have these types of conversations around these and many other topics every day, literally every day, and as do many others. We have so many opportunities at FIU already that give voice and give space for these really important and often very challenging discussions to be had. So I think it's about, for us, I hear that we need to make sure everybody knows what these opportunities are, that we are inviting and have people at the right place at the right moment, but also that these enhancements are hopefully going to help with that. So I know that's very general, but I think there's a lot going on here. This is not like a brand new topic for us. or for our students, obviously, as thank you, Annalise has already really clearly articulated, and even Jeff as a recent alum, that this is not a new topic or a new item for us, and we do want to make sure it continues to be important.
Thank you so much, Dr. Plies. I want to go ahead and before we jump back to Judge Cook and Professor Wasserman, here's some additional insight from Annalise about perspectives that our BSU has with respect to building a truly more inclusive culture on campus. What does that, from your vantage point and the good work that you and your colleagues at the BSU are doing, what does that look like?
That's a really great question, Saif. I think with our BSU, I think doing this work of advocacy coupled with our actual mission as a programming council, it's a lot of work. And what we want is for the responsibility to be, as we've all stated before, to be shared, right? We want our university administration to be doing things that we can see so that we can, because essentially what we're doing is truly just enriching what our university is for the students that are here, right? That's what we're here to do. And any council, any involvement, that's what we're here to do. We're here to add programming. We're here to inject life into our student body. And so we want to be able to dedicate more time to doing that, doing what our mission is. And so I think once everyone starts doing the work that needs to be done and students see that the work is being done, it'll be a relief for our programming council, the Black Student Union, to be able to program and to be able to, you know, like enrich the experience of the students on campus by doing what we are supposed to do. So I hope that answered your question. Let me know if it didn't. I can add a little more.
That was well said. Thank you. Thank you for that. And also for the leadership that our BSU has demonstrated on this subset of issues that we're discussing, and also in allyship. I know with so many different student groups that are committed to the long journey of what we're discussing. So we're getting close to time, but we've got a couple of other questions that I'm going to go ahead and send in the direction. I'm going to start with Professor Wasserman, and the question is: free speech is one speech, but not all speech is equal. How do we as a university and as individuals address when speech is unequal, such as when one person's speech holds more power and influence due to their position or status, or due to it being a majority voice over a minority? Any thoughts on that? You're on mute.
Yep, I know. Yep, word of the year, unmute yourself. You know, so I think what the university can do in that situation and should do is try to provide as many opportunities, as many expressive opportunities for people as possible. So one thing that the university can do is open up spaces, physical and virtual, to give more people more opportunities to speak. And that sort of can potentially help to even out the disparities of you know, relatively advantaged versus relatively disadvantaged people and access to outlets and to media and so forth. The majority minority point is interesting because I'm not sure which way it goes. The idea is that, again, we wouldn't need to protect free speech if the speech that was allowed was speech that the majority endorsed. So at some level, we're talking about the need to protect speech that runs contrary to the majority views up to a point. And then the legal debate is where that point is.
Thank you so much for sharing that that perspective. We have Professor Wasserman. We have another question which might be good for Judge Cook or Professor Wasserman or any of the other panelists, which is really around what is the distinction between hate speech and speech that incites violence? Is there a distinction? And could some speech meet both tests?
Judge, do you want to?
Well, I think
Take a crack
someone
at
really
this?
put their thinking caps on for that question.
I didn't come up with that. I didn't come up with that. That's not me. That's not me.
I am going to say yes. There is speech that may often come within both or more than one parameter, meaning you could have speech that is simultaneously protected speech and unprotected speech, and you may have them occurring at the same time. This is why, lawyers have jobs because someone is going to have to parse out factually which is which. And I would not say that it is a hard and fast rule. But I think some of the factors that is laid out or are laid out in your student handbook might give you a clue. And that is the speech used to intimidate? Is the speech used to coerce? Is the speech used to incite violence? Is the speech used to incite fear or prevent movement in some way? Those are the types of speech that I think go beyond the protected dialogue speech, that even though your speech is not what I want to hear, it is of a subject that I don't think is appropriate, might fall legally into the categories that Dr. Wasserman discussed earlier today in his remarks.
Saif, can I just add to that?
Sure thing,
Because
Professor.
I want to try to, and maybe this will help the discussion, and maybe it won't, but I think it's worth a try. So current First Amendment law doesn't recognize a category called hate speech or a category called racist speech. There's just speech, and it could be racist, it could be sexist, it could be anti-Semitic, it could be anti-Republican, anti-Democrat. There's just speech. And so it doesn't recognize some category called hate speech. And then there are these categories of unprotected speech, like harassment, like coercion, like incitement. And something can be incitement, regardless of whether the incitement was based on racist views or anti-democratic views or something else. So the case that gives us the current standard for incitement arose from a Klan rally, at which the speaker at the Klan rally was uttering racist and anti-Semitic ideas and using racist and anti-Semitic epithets. And ultimately, that wasn't central to the case. The key was, okay, what's incitement? What qualifies as incitement, regardless of the basis that the incitement is being urged. And so I think that might help the discussion, when we say, well, if hate speech is protected, can we do X, Y, and Z? Well, we got to know what X, Y, and Z are. You can't disrupt a classroom, but you can't disrupt a classroom with racist speech or with anything else. And so shifting that focus a little bit might help, hopefully will help us get a clearer sense of where the legal lines are.
Thank you so much.
I think early on, the courts have talked about speech that materially disrupts or prevents the educational environment from operating or functioning. So you look at the type of speech, I think, in terms of that stricture that's been outlined and functioned for a very long time. I mean, if you look at quickly, one of the cases that the court has looked at was a student who used a student rally to put out a sign that said "Bong hits for Jesus." Now I'll let you know how old this case is, as Professor Wasserman will tell you, is the speech ultimately was prohibited because the court found that it was sort of advocating criminal activity. Now, given the new way that marijuana is approached, I'm not sure that that case would stand muster that it's advocating criminal activity. But those are and it was actually on school property. So those are the kinds of things that the court looks at when it's determining whether or not speech in the university context should be restricted.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Judge Cook. And I didn't think on a Friday afternoon anybody thought they would hear that sequence of words come from your mouth. So I want to go ahead and appreciate just the power of words and also of the written language. We've got a 30-second question that I'm going to go ahead and ask to either Dr. Bowles or Dr. Pelaez, which is the university considering anti-racism training for students, faculty, and staff? And will these trainings or coursework be required? So anti-racism training for stakeholders at our FIU, are there plans for that?
Yes and yes. The required stuff might be a little bit, I'm not at liberty to say about required, but we will be offering it for our students through a module, through our SLS class, for our faculty and staff. There will be, just like we do cybersecurity training every year, there will be a diversity and inclusion training that we will be gearing up to launch fairly soon. And in other ways as well, we'll be having different types of content that goes out to our managers, like how to have an inclusive conversation during a difficult time. And then we'll have framed, facilitated discussions around it, book groups, right? To learn more. So yes, that was a long version to the answer to that question, but yes, definitely.
Well, I want to thank you, Dr. Bowles, and I want to thank all of our panelists. Before I pass it back over to SVP Hudson, I want to appreciate everyone for joining us, who's listening in. But I also want to close with this. 160 years ago, one of the greatest freedom fighters our nation has ever known, the abolitionist Frederick Douglass, stood up on a chilly Boston morning in December of 1860, exactly 160 years ago. And Frederick Douglass gave a speech entitled "A Plea for Free Speech in Boston." In it, Frederick Douglass boldly declared that, quote, "Liberty is meaningless where the right to utter one's thought and opinions has ceased to exist." Each one of us here today has shown that as we seek to ensure that our FIU is indeed a beloved community where dignity, respect, and affirmation of every single person is realized, we stand united for our freedoms. And those words of Frederick Douglass ring truer today, exactly 160 years from when he said them, that early chilly morning in Boston, as they do today. So with that, I want to pass it back over to SVP Hudson for some final words. EK?
Thank you so very much to all of you, our panelists. This was just amazing, a great step in the direction of what we wanted to do. We wanted to listen, we wanted to be enlightened, we wanted to be inspired. We've gotten some aha moments, and we've gotten some real talk, real challenges. And you know what I appreciate is I recall when we met with Dr. Rosenberg earlier this summer, when he commissioned this work, he says, we're gonna have to get comfortable having the uncomfortable conversations. Clearly the needs are many. And as Saif mentioned earlier on, listen, we won't resolve all our needs in an hour and a half, but I wanna reiterate that we hear you, FIU, we see you, and we've made a commitment at the very highest levels. As Dr. Bowles noted, there were several members of our community that worked collaboratively to complete this work because our president had the courage to direct it, okay? And evidence of that commitment is actualized in one of the goals right away when he established the Division of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. So that speaks, that's matching the words to the deeds. And what's that for? It's not to posture, it's to operationalize the goals that we've committed to. And our collective hearts and hands are going to be necessary to participate. Let me tell you this, beyond the metrics, beyond the goals, beyond the policies and the procedures, our main priority is that we enunciate this mantra: you belong here. You belong here. And I plead with you to join us on November 23rd. Save that date so you can get to look under the hood and see what your FIU is doing and what you can do to participate. Thank you so much, Saif. Thank you all. Thank you, Judge. All of you all. We appreciate you. To all of our 300 plus guests that were with us this afternoon, we appreciate you. This isn't the last time. Stay close, stay connected, and we appreciate you. Have a fabulous Friday and a wonderful weekend ahead. Thank you so much for joining us.